A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. I am so glad that you are with us today. Another crazy, chaotic day across the nation. Yeah, welcome to Thursday. We've got Rob O'Donnell coming up on the program here in just a couple of minutes, a former New York police officer who will be talking about what happened in New York City on Wednesday. Violent protests, I would call them protests. Violent assaults, let's say, of a peaceful protest taking place on the Brooklyn Bridge, a pro-police march that was interrupted by individuals wielding chains, ended up assaulting some of these marchers, assaulted several New York police officers as well. Take a look at this video.
Conduct. If you do not cooperate and accompany the arresting officer to the prisoner transport vehicle, or if you resist arrest, you may be charged with additional crimes. Since you have refused to leave the roadway, you will be placed under arrest on the charge of disorderly conduct. If you do not cooperate and accompany the arresting officer to the prisoner transport vehicle, or if you resist arrest, you may be charged with additional crimes. Since you have refused to leave the roadway, you will be placed under arrest on the charge of disorderly conduct. If you do not cooperate and accompany the arresting officer to the prisoner transport vehicle, or if you resist arrest, you may be charged with additional crimes. Since you have refused to leave the roadway, you will be placed under arrest on the charge of disorderly conduct.
And where is Mayor Bill de Blasio? Well, he's probably painting a mural somewhere outside of Trump Tower, figuring another way to get some more headlines while ignoring the rising crime rate in New York City, as well as assaults like this that are taking place really in all five boroughs at this point. So we'll talk with Rob O'Donnell, former New York police officer with the organization Brothers Before Others, coming up here in just a moment or two. But before we get to that, we do have a special announcement for you. President Trump, he's getting ready for the 2020 Republican National Convention this summer, and he wants you to enter for your chance to join him at the convention. If you win, the team will cover the flight, hotel, and give you VIP passes for yourself and a guest. All you have to do is text ARMS to 88022 today for your chance to meet President Trump at the convention. Again, that's ARMS, ARMS, to 88022 to enter to win this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be his special guest, paid for by Donald J. Trump for President Incorporated. All right, let's get to our conversation with former New York police officer Rob O'Donnell. He joined me just a short time ago to talk about the latest in New York City and why he believes things are only going to get worse from here. Rob O'Donnell, thank you so much, sir, for coming on the program. It's good talking with you today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, we have seen violence and we have seen unrest in New York City, but I'm not sure that we've seen anything like what happened yesterday. A peaceful march disrupted by these, Antifa agitators, Black Lives Matter protesters. You had several police officers injured, including one of the chiefs there in New York. I mean, what's your reaction when you see scenes like this playing out on the Brooklyn Bridge, Rob?
Yeah, the public needs to realize if the chief of the department, the highest-ranking uniformed member of the New York City Police Department, with a police force of 36,000 officers, can be assaulted by these thugs, what do they expect? What kind of protection do they expect if they're turned on and attacked?
Absolutely. And what's been the reaction from, New York City officials like Mayor Bill de Blasio?
Well, that very day, he signed this irrational, ill-thought-out legislation that passed by City Council that is going to restrain your New York City police officer, not just your New York City police officer, but any police officer who works in New York City. The New York State Police Union wrote a letter to their chief demanding that they remove all New York State police out of the confines of New York City because of this legislation. And they bill it as an anti-chokehold legislation, but chokeholds have been banned by the NYPD policy for years. This goes way much further and will actually increase the use of force. What this legislation does is you can no longer use any restraints around the neck whatsoever. You cannot put compression on the torso or chest or the back. you figure out if you were willing to resist arrest, how is someone going to control you if they can only touch your hands, wrists, and legs? What this is going to do is take that tool away from the police officers, where they would normally take a resisting subject and restrain him to the ground to handcuff him, and resort to impact force, striking them in the face, using their batons, using a taser, using deadly physical force, because you've removed the whole physical force aspect out of policing.
Which, of course, I'm sure the first time that happens, the city council is going to be right back, and they're going to say, all right, you can't do that either. I mean, it really appears at this point that, these politicians are simply not interested in hearing what law enforcement has to say in terms of how these, I don't even want to call this a reform measure, how these restrictions will impact their ability to do their job.
Yeah, I don't think they care how these restrictions will allow them. What your police officer is going to end up doing is one of two things if a subject resists. They're going to let the subject flee and take a report, or they're going to resort to an upper level of force above physical force, which is one of the lower. You have your verbal force, you have your light touch, and then you have your physical force. And from there, you go to your mace, your chemical force, your impact weapons, your batons, strikes, physical strikes, blows to the face and head and torso, and deadly physical force. They remove that, and I don't think they've thought through the aspect of that. And the turnaround to that is, now that they've criminalized these moves as stating that they'll create serious physical injury to the suspect, when these same moves are used on the police, are the police now justified in responding with deadly physical force? If they're saying I might be seriously physical injured, which is the criteria for deadly physical force, by someone grabbing me around the neck, and I use my firearm against them, have they just justified that as far as city policy through legislation?
It's a great question. Again, I'm sure they would say, oh, heck no, we haven't. But, again, how this plays out in the real world, I think, is likely to be far different. And I got to ask, Rob, I mean, I know that you're in touch with a lot of active duty members of the New York Police Department. I can only imagine how low morale is at the moment. But, are you hearing officers say, I'm retiring early, I'm looking to get out, I'm looking to move to another department? I mean, what do you think the New York Police Department looks like 6 months from now, a year from now?
Well, they're doing what they can to keep the finger in the dam. Retirements, early retirements, resignations have increased so much that the department has actually limited how many people can come down per day, because, outside of a dozen or so on a normal day, they're getting hundreds. So they had to limit that because, in the past month alone, there was over 600 to 800. And a lot of them are resignations, vesting out early, and retirements. Everyone I know with 20 years on the police force is looking to retire as soon as they can now. So you're losing those experienced officers, those officers who have seen the turnaround in New York City from the 90s. And you're going to be left with new, ill-equipped officers that have these policies that aren't allowing them to do their jobs.
At the same time, we are seeing this spike in violence in New York City. It's lasted now for at least a couple of months. No end in sight. Mayor de Blasio doesn't really seem to have any idea of what to do. I know that he said last week, we're going to take back the block, and we're going to have unarmed civilians walking with police officers. We're going to try to get the community involved. That didn't seem to bring the violence down over the weekend. How badly is the mayor flailing right now, Rob?
It's the worst. I mean, I was hired under Mayor Dinkins. This is the worst incompetence I've seen at the leadership of New York City. Far outweighing, Mayor Dinkins' time, where crime was at an all-time high. The rapid decline and increase of crime is the decline of everyday modern day society in New York, and the increase of crime. Shooting incidents are double what they were. This a 200% increase. Week to date. 260% increase 28 day to date. 200 something percent increase. The victims have doubled. You look at burglaries have doubled, up 65%. They're blaming it on things like people being bored and locked in their house. No, these are gang shootings. You see them on social media every day. They just drive up and shoot at people and execute them, kill 1-year-old children, having a barbecue with their family. This is not crimes of opportunity. These are not, I'm looking for a loaf of bread to feed my family because I can't pay my rent. These are not, I just don't like you and we had a fist fight and now I'm going to shoot you. These are hardened criminals who've been released from the jail systems, who have a history of gun violence, who are just walking around because they know there's no anti-crime units out there. They know the only people out there are uniformed police officers. And if there's not a uniformed cop or a uniformed police car around, they know they're free to drive up and just shoot randomly. And this is what you get when that happens.
Is there any pushback to the dismantling of the anti-crime unit there in New York City? I mean, I know we're starting to see in places like Minneapolis, there are now community leaders that are coming out and saying, okay, listen, this call to defund and dismantle the police department is absolutely ridiculous. Is there anybody saying that in New York City right now?
Yeah, you're starting to get winds of it. The Brooklyn borough president came out and said maybe that it should be rethought about the disbanding of the anti-crime units. They on the left have used the word racial profiling and profiling by police for decades now to try and get their ends of curtailing the police. Now, profiling, racial profiling, or be it criminal profiling, whatever they want to call it, is based on hard data. They are profiling over 800,000 police officers nationwide by the actions of the officers that I can count on one hand nationally. And they have no problem profiling an entire profession, 800,000 police officers, where 99.9998% of them go out day in and day out and do the job. And they have no data to back that, because when you look at the data, it's non-existent. Yes, police misconduct exists. Also, what exists is the tools to deal with that, and it is dealt with. What happened to Mr. Floyd is disgraceful. But the system is working. The officer was identified. He was not a flight risk. He was charged and arrested. These things need to be done right by the book, not on social media timescale where it needs to be done right now, instantaneously. Because a year from now, if there's an acquittal or if there's a problem with this trial because they rushed it and rushed to judgment and rushed to charge based on pressure from social media, we're going to be in a worse place when there's an acquittal a year from now. And we've learned these lessons. We've seen what happens with the O.J. Simpson trial. We've seen what happened when these issues in Baltimore, time and time again, but we're not learning from these lessons. These progressive, these activists, these radical politicians are taking the emotions off of social media and pushing these agendas that are only going to hurt these same people. The people of wealth in New York City that have the means, they're just going to leave. The corporations there, they're just going to leave. So what's going to happen? You're going to have the workers out of work. You're going to have the people who can't move, who live in these inner cities, mostly people of color who don't have the means to leave these areas, be subject to crime, because the statistics and the facts show us that they are more likely to be the victims of crime, of black suspects, more than anyone else. So they're only hurting their own people. But de Blasio doesn't care. He's got a year left. When this really comes to fruition, where it's bad enough to where people can't take it anymore, someone else will be holding the bag, not him. But the citizens of New York need to realize that he needs to be held accountable for the damage that was done to set the stage for what's happening now.
Absolutely. Do you see, given, again, the one-party politics of New York City, do you see anything changing in the short term, or is this just going to keep getting worse?
It's going to get worse, unfortunately. Anyone I know, I've advised them not to go anywhere near the city, which is a shame. It's a beautiful city. I was born and raised there, lived there my whole life. What's happened there is disgraceful. I'm allowed to be armed 24/7 anywhere in the country, and I will not travel to New York City. It's just not worth the confrontation, not worth the hassle of these criminals who have been emboldened to act more criminally, just looking for trouble. That's what these policies do. When you tell criminals that the police aren't going to go hands-on with them when they push the envelope, when the police don't have the tools to deal with them, we saw what happens yesterday. They take canes and pipes and strike the police over the head. Where do you think your average citizen stands if they just look at them the wrong way walking down the street?
Absolutely. Now, I got to ask you one last question. The Washington Post had a big piece yesterday about a couple of studies that have come out by anti-gun researchers claiming that the increase in gun sales since really March of this year is what's driving the increase in violent crime in places like New York City. What's your take on that, Rob?
That's just typical of the Washington Post, typical of liberal media. It's just not factually based. They know where these guns are coming from. They're illegal guns from the judicial revolving door that are releasing gun offenders back out on the street that realize that, hey, if I can use a gun in shooting and just wound someone, maybe I'll only get 6 months or get released because of my COVID fears. This has nothing to do with legal gun ownership. Legal gun ownership is increasing, skyrocketing nationwide because of what individuals, law-abiding citizens are seeing. What I'm seeing as a law enforcement professional, the very reason I, as an armed citizen, will not go to New York City. It's sad.
What do you think? I know it's not ever going to happen, but what do you think would happen to the crime rate in New York City if the city's policies changed? It didn't take 6 months and hundreds of dollars simply to get a permission slip to keep it in your home. What would happen to the crime rate if the Second Amendment were recognized in New York City starting today?
New York City would become Houston, Texas. It would be a right to carry state where people are able to defend themselves, and criminals would have a deterrent to be criminals.
There you go. Rob O'Donnell, former New York police officer. Brothers Before Others is the organization that Rob is with right now. Rob, it is always good talking to you, my friend. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today, and hope we get a chance to do this again very soon. I appreciate Rob O'Donnell with us here on the program. Before we get to today's Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day, our recidivist report, once again, a reminder that President Trump has a huge announcement for his top supporters. He's celebrating the 2020 Republican National Convention later this summer, and he wants you to enter for your chance to join him at the convention. If you win, the team will cover the flight, the hotel, and give you VIP passes for yourself and a guest. All you have to do is text ARMS to 88022 today for your chance to meet President Trump at the convention. Again, that is ARMS, as in, bearing arms. ARMS to 88022 to enter to win this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be President Trump's special guest, paid for by Donald J. Trump for President Incorporated. All right, so let's move on now to our armed citizen story, our good deed of the day, our recidivist report. And let's go ahead and start there with our look at the criminal justice system and the failures that seem to be pretty commonplace these days. This particular story out of Pennsylvania, York City, where police are now looking for two brothers who they say shot a man in his home back in late June. Both of these brothers known to police, one of them specifically charged with a violent crime last year, as a matter of fact. 21-year-old Anthony Eugene Faison Jr. and 18-year-old Tamil Khalik Faison have both been charged with attempted homicide, aggravated assault, and illegal possession of a firearm. Police requested arrest warrants back on June the 12th, but both individuals still at large as of Wednesday afternoon. The York Dispatch says that both brothers have faced charges before. In 2019, the younger brother, Tamil, pleaded guilty to first-degree felony of aggravated assault, as well as misdemeanor possession of a firearm by a minor for a shooting that happened when he was 16 years of age. He was not sentenced to prison for that crime. According to the York Dispatch, he was sentenced to 11 and a half to 23 months in the York County lockup, and then 5 years probation. Yeah. His older brother, Anthony, charged back in 2018 with several felony drug offenses. So I'm not sure why these individuals, again, they're facing attempted homicide charges, aggravated assault, illegal possession of a firearm. I guess that's felon in possession, right? Now, I will say I'm not convinced that even if these individuals are apprehended and they go to trial, that we're actually going to see a serious sentence handed down for either of these gentlemen, given the fact that Tamil Faison, again, a slap on the wrist for a shooting just a couple of years ago. But again, first you got to catch them before you can try them. And right now the Faison brothers are still on the run. Our armed citizen story of the day from WISH in Indianapolis, Indiana. A amazing story out of a town called Brownsburg, Indiana, which is not far from Indianapolis. This all played out Tuesday afternoon. You see there a screenshot from WISH. So police still aren't sure exactly what happened. Well, they know what happened. They're not sure why this happened. But Tuesday afternoon, a 22-year-old from Indianapolis drives to Brownsburg, pulls up at a cemetery, gets out of his car, walks up to two employees that were working there at the cemetery and starts shooting at them. Now, police say they have not been able to determine any connection between this guy who started shooting and the workers at the cemetery. They call this an unprovoked attack. 22-year-old Joshua Hayes identified as the suspect in this case. And when he opened fire, the two cemetery workers, they ran. They took off in different directions, hoping to, separate themselves. One of them, Seth Robertson, 36 years old from Indianapolis, was pursued by Mr. Hayes and eventually shot and killed. And then Hayes turned his attention to the second cemetery worker, identified by police only as Victim 2. And he began chasing Victim 2 through the streets of this residential neighborhood around the cemetery. Eventually, they get to an intersection. And Hayes is firing shots at victim number 2. One of those shots hits victim number 3, who is a motorist who's sitting in his car waiting for the light to change so he can drive forward. And he's hit by one of these rounds. Victim 3 is a concealed carry holder. And victim 3 got out of his car, drew his firearm, and shot and killed Joshua Hayes as Hayes had that gun pointed at the head of victim number 2, putting a stop to this attack. Now, there were other motorists, there were other passerby. There is no telling how bad this situation could have gotten. It was already bad enough, obviously. But that armed citizen, not expected to face any charges, by the way, saving the life of at least one man and possibly several others there in Brownsburg, Indiana. Again, a story that the national media has completely and utterly ignored. Well, at least the local news outlets bothered to report on this. Finally today, our good deed of the day from Sheffield, Alabama, where a police officer's quick thinking actually saved the life of a city councilwoman over the weekend. This city councilwoman was driving a forklift. Apparently, she was taking this forklift to a community event, and it caught fire. Yeah. Penny Freeman is the councilwoman. She says that Officer Kenny Elkins, who was providing her with an escort as she was driving the forklift down the street, jumped out of his patrol car, ran over to the forklift, reached in, and rolled her off the seat and out of the flames. She said that the officer somehow broke the seatbelt when he rolled her off the forklift, didn't cut it or press the button, but she had her seatbelt on, somehow managed to get her out. Once he led the councilwoman to safety, Officer Elkins then began trying to extinguish the fire. Officer Max Dodson arrived on the scene, also helped put out the blaze. The chief says they ended up having to use 2 fire extinguishers before that blaze was extinguished. The councilwoman was taken to a local hospital for treatment. She was released later in the day and actually was able to go back to some of those community events on a Saturday afternoon. Freeman says that she suffered some second and third degree burns to her left hand as well as the left side of her body. So she was injured here in this. She says it was a very aggressive fire. She said the fact that I came away with second and third degree burns and didn't lose half my body is amazing. Everybody involved was simply amazing. Officer Max Dodson, after Freeman went to the hospital, actually went to Walmart to get her a pair of shoes after hers melted in the fire. Also offered to get her prescriptions filled. The police chief says that Sergeant Dodson checked on her throughout the day in the hospital as well. So in the right place at the right time to save the life of Councilwoman Penny Freeman in Sheffield, Alabama. Officer Kenny Elkins, Officer Max Dodson, we thank you for your very good deeds. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program. As always, don't forget, you can subscribe to Town Hall Media at YouTube. That way you never miss a program. Also, a Bearing Arms Cam & Company podcast on Apple Podcasts. And coming up tomorrow, we're going to talk with a grad student at Indiana State University about some of the attitudes, some of the false attitudes regarding gun ownership for non-white Americans. Yeah, there's a lot of those stereotypes flying around here, but we're going to get to the bottom of it. In the meantime, I really do appreciate you taking part in the program. Don't forget as well, you can also become a VIP Gold member of Bearing Arms. You get exclusive commentary, analysis, live chats, and more. You can sign up at bearingarms.com. We certainly do appreciate all your support. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Until then, be safe, be well, be free. And we'll see you soon with another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam & Company.